She felt the familiar ache of emotion in her throat and swallowed it back before tears could bubble to the surface. The ashen heir did not cry. Ever. Even when Danelle took one wrong step and the cliffside exploded around him. And chapter break. Now, in a lot of writing classes, they really don't tell you about chapter pacing. So I was really relieved in hearing Brandon Sanderson mention it in one of his writing lectures. One thing he mentioned is that when you are pacing your novel and you're trying to decide whether to make a chapter longer or shorter, the shorter chapters should be used to help pull your reader through different moments in your story. You want to use this for like action-packed scenes, or a pretty common place you might see shorter chapters is in your ordeal or your climax. Now, if you want, you can sort of experiment as you're writing, because these are just drafts, so it never hurts to go in and just add chapter breaks and then, go and rest, go and take a nap, go and do something else for a little bit and just give yourself space from the novel, and then come back and read through it again just to see how it feels. And you'll know as you read, you'll be able to tell, oh, okay, this pacing is better or this pacing is worse. Now, you'll want to use longer scenes when you're trying to build exposition or create a really strong emotional point. That's where you do a lot of your character development, is in longer scenes. I find pacing in novels to be pretty interesting because you have kind of two climaxes. You have like your ordeal in the middle, and then you have your actual climax, which is closer to the end. And so there has to be another period of rising action kind of in between the ordeal and the climax, and it's the road back when you're looking at the hero's journey. So I kind of break it into two parts when I'm outlining it. You have to realize that there's sort of a new stage, right? So you have to sort of create exposition, you have to create character development based on what actually happened in the ordeal. After my ordeal, a few things are revealed about the protagonist to her love interests, and there has to be some time for them to kind of sit with that and respond to it. And there's a lot of stress on the characters because one of the other love interests is in a coma and they don't know if he's going to survive. So these are all different circumstances that require more exposition and like deeper thinking and reflection on the parts of the character. Under any other circumstances, she would have welcomed the distraction that Coco brought. Her personal guard consisted of 5 of the best officers. Making a thoughtful noise in her throat, Hyacinth pushed herself up off of her pile of pillows and walked across her tent to stand beside the only source of light, a large, cracked black stone. Beneath the cracks. As I'm reading and as I'm going through this, one thing that I'm probably going to struggle with is not editing as I go. And there's a very important reason that I am not editing as I go through the novel, and that's because I don't want to multitask. As a mom with ADHD, multitasking is the antagonist of my life, and I see it a lot as a parent. I know when I'm multitasking that I am much more susceptible to my triggers. Like, I'm much more likely to yell or get angry when I multitask. And the same can be said for my writing. I'm not going to get as much done. It's going to be much less productive if I'm multitasking. There's a chapter I want to kind of rewrite with Ray, and it's going to be so hard because I'm so excited to write it, but it will distract me from our mission. So we need to be very mission oriented today. We are dropping the bomb in the Death Star or whatever he does. So we are not going to edit as we go because multitasking is the enemy. That is our mantra. We are not going to forget it. That is why I am taking notes. I want to take notes to make sure that I capture all of the ADHD thoughts that I have swimming around in my head and put them on paper so that when I'm ready to edit and work on draft 7, I know what I wanted to do, what I was thinking, and where I was going with each chapter. The hardest thing about taking notes is that you have to write notes in a way that future you is going to understand it. And so I'm going to show you exactly how I organize my notes as I go so that future me can understand what I was thinking. To keep it really simple, for each chapter I make a separate section for characters, plot, and world building, and then I add my notes from there. This keeps everything organized by chapter so that it's really easy for you to come back and to understand what exactly you need to do. I'm feeling pretty good about my progress today. Earlier this morning I was able to read technically 2 chapters. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about today because I added my first chapter break that was not already in there. And the reason I added a new chapter break here is because the second part of the chapter is actually its own little miniature arc in the story. And the reason that that's so important is because there's a few things that you actually need to do when you're writing your chapters. At a super basic level, every single chapter you write needs to create what is known as a dopamine loop. And that means that you've made a promise for your chapter, and then the chapter in its entirety is fulfilling that promise. And then at the very end of the chapter, you're adding in a promise for the next chapter. Now, the simplest way you can do this is sort your chapters by the Freytag's pyramid. But as a discovery writer, when I get that in depth with my chapters, it doesn't make the writing process as fun. So the way that I recommend this, if you are a discovery writer, is to write out your first draft, do some of your major plot editing, and then as you're going through and hopefully reading with me as you're doing this and taking notes, you can make notes for what kind of storylines and what kind of arcs need to be in each individual chapter. So the first half of this chapter really needs to establish a lot more exposition than it actually does. I looked through it and it's about 1,300 words. Based on that, I do need to make it longer. I need to get it to between 2,000 and 3,000 words. It could even go up to 4,000 words because it is an exposition chapter, but I've actually already thought of a good way to make the promise for the next chapter, because at the end of the chapter, the one that I've broken off and turned into chapter 3, there's actually a pretty distinct story there. At the beginning of it, her personal guard brings her soup, and the soup has shambler flesh in it. Shamblers are essentially zombies, and quite often the Ashen will eat shamblers when they're low on supplies. Hyacinth does not like eating shambler flesh, as you can imagine. Who would? So she's ordered the personal chef not to put shambler's flesh in her food. Unfortunately, they're low on supplies and he does it anyway. Now, in my novel, in where I am so far between chapters 1, 2, and 3 being the new chapter 3 after we've put in the chapter break, I used dialogue to just kind of really quickly establish that she's ordered the chef not to put shambler flesh in her food. However, I think the best way to make the promise at the end of chapter 2 is to show her confronting the chef at the end, or maybe like giving him a gentle reminder or something and being like, hey, I know we're low on supplies right now, so just as a reminder, don't put shambler flesh in my food. And then the start of chapter 3 starts with, oh, he's put shambler flesh in her food. And then at the end of chapter 3, the new chapter 3, I have a cliffhanger right before the inciting incident for the story. So it should really excite readers to be like, what's happening? Like, what do you mean there was an explosion? What are you talking about? One thing I do want to touch on while we're thinking about it, because we talked about different chapter lengths, certain scenes are not going to have the same impact unless you draw them out. For example, a good rule of thumb for your climax is that you want to make your chapters shorter. But for my climax, the way that it works out in my story, if I were to interrupt that scene halfway through, it would not have the same impact that it has as an entire long chapter. One way that I'm going to kind of rectify this and respond to it is I am going to make the chapters leading up to the climax much shorter than the climax itself. And then I think this is maybe more advanced. And so since this is my debut novel, I'm honestly not sure how much emphasis I'm going to put on this. But I think one thing as you're going up to the climax that would make it really, really good is that each chapter becomes subsequently shorter. So like maybe after you have your ordeal point or your midway point, you have like a long kind of exposition chapter that's establishing what happened after your midway point. And then the next chapter is a little bit shorter. And then as you approach the climax, they get shorter and shorter and shorter, so that you're kind of like pulling them through. And, you know, when you get to the end of the rope, it gets shorter and shorter, and you have to make smaller movements to actually get it to pull. She screamed, throwing the sound up into the canopy overhead. She screamed until her throat felt raw. She screamed until the only sound that came out was a hollow croaking. Finally, she laid down on her shoulders, sobbing silently as she stared into the dark forest. So I'm settling in to write for the evening, and I just realized that I left my water downstairs, but I want to talk to you about action and reaction chapters before I actually run downstairs and get it, because I know if I do that, I am going to forget my points and forget what I was talking about, because that is how ADHD works. So the thing you have to think about here when it comes to action and reaction chapters is your action chapters are when something happens, and your reaction chapters give characters an opportunity to respond to it. Because of course, when something happens to a human, they're going to have a reaction to it. You're not going to lose your job and then not feel anything, right? Or you're not going to look at your totally fantastic, wonderful cat and not think about how cute he is. I mean, just look at his face. Oh, angel. Where was I? Oh yeah, actions and reactions. So we talked about reactions already. Now, this is not something that your readers are necessarily going to recognize as you're writing, but they will recognize if you do not give your characters opportunities to feel, respond, grow, and do the things that characters are supposed to do. A huge pet peeve of mine, I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of newer, more contemporary pieces of literature and stories and television and whatnot have instances where the characters do not grow. The two examples I can think off the top of my head are the Umbrella Academy and then Children of Blood and Bone. In both instances, the characters are facing a really, really high stakes thing. Okay, Zane basically dies, like he almost loses his life, and then in the Umbrella Academy, the world is facing total destruction. If you went through a traumatic event like either of those and then didn't learn something, that is so unrealistic. I'm sorry, but if a family member tries to kill you, you're probably not going to trust your family members anymore. That's just my 2 cents. The main thing is when you are writing your chapters, you need to consider whether or not your chapters are action chapters or reaction chapters. So currently I'm writing chapter 6, which is a reaction chapter. I need to give Hyacinth time to react and process how she is feeling about the inciting incident. One thing I'm noticing right off the top of the bat is how I open the chapter. I'm doing a time jump, and I think that is a little bit jarring. I think it would be better if rather than at the beginning of the chapter, I do a time jump maybe closer to like the middle of the chapter, because I kind of have to move things along, right? It's going to take them several months to actually travel to where they need to go so that she can meet her love interests. But she also needs to have time to kind of process and respond to what is happening after the inciting incident, because it is a lot for one demon princess to deal with. So we have to give her the opportunity to actually deal with it. Also, if you watched my video last week, you will know that I couldn't find my zebra pen. I got a new zebra pen. So that is our quill of choice today. If you are a quill buddy, definitely hit that subscribe button and type #Quillies in the comments so that I know that you're a quilly. So I know I said I'm not supposed to edit, but I'm going to make an exception right here because the section that I'm reading right now is a speech to text section that I have not updated yet, and it's just really obnoxious to read through, and I look at it and I'm like, everything's wrong. So I'm gonna fix this, and we're not gonna talk about it, okay? No multitasking here. Oh my gosh, I cannot type. That last scene didn't have the kitty box open, but we already have the non-aesthetic cup of water, so here we are. I mean, come on, it said her name was Pinnacle. So this chapter is super short. This is way too short. I think it's a good opportunity for a cliffhanger, but I also don't want to leave a cliffhanger twice in a row, if that makes sense. So I might remove this chapter break and just extend the chapter, as well as add in the parts where Hyacinth gets to react to the inciting incident, but I think that's going to be something that I will decide after draft 7. The next chapter also looks pretty short, so combining them would not be the end of the world, and it kind of puts all of the exposition in one place. There's also something I kind of wanted to talk about that I'm not entirely sure I'm going to get to because it happens later on in the book, and since as a mom, you know, you really have to protect your energy and think about how you're using your energy more effectively, I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to get to it this week. But one thing I wanted to talk about is choosing how long to actually make your novel. And the main thing I'm thinking about right now as it relates to my novel is that I had a scene in there, and in the last draft I took it out, but now I'm realizing I need that scene in there because it is specifically closeness between Hyacinth and Liam Liam before she even realizes that it's Liam. Liam is the shifter in my novel, and she doesn't know he's a shifter. She doesn't know he can shift. He also goes into dreams. So there's a few scenes where he's going into her dreams in his shifted form, and in the first one, that's actually their meet cute, but my hope is that the reader won't realize it when I'm showing it. And then in the second one, Liam kind of entices her into like cuddling with him. I'm trying not to spoil what his animal is. It'll make sense once you know what his animal is. Liam is definitely one of my favorite characters of her love interest. I say that about every single love interest. It just depends on the day. But today, Liam is one of my favorites of her love interests. And so I'm actually going to be adding that dream sequence back in because I think it's really important to the intimacy development of Hyacinth and Liam, because each of them has their own romance arc, and then there's a romance arc for the court as a whole. But I just wanted to end with all of that because I feel like that's all really important to talk about. And next week, we are going to be applying all of the notes that I take this week, or maybe we're going to be still reading and I can have a little Q&A session. I'm not entirely sure. If you're new here and you've enjoyed this video, then definitely hit that subscribe button and don't forget to like and share this video. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. All of your support really means the world to me. I want to give a shout out to Electra424 because you have been so active in my comments and you're always engaging, and I really appreciate the time that you spend with me, and I love all of the questions you ask, and I hope that these videos continue to provide value for you. So thank you so much, Electra424, for watching.